Have a good night, Roman, the receptionist said to me as I walked past her desk while she was getting ready to close up. I smiled and waved as I left the gym and entered the brisk night air. Checking the time as my stomach made a gurgling sound, I saw that it was 9:47 p.m., and every fast food place in my small town would be closed by now. I looked across the road and saw that the local grocery store was open until 10, so I started lightly jogging towards it, the cold breeze biting through my clothes and attacking my face and neck since I didn't dry off my hair properly after showering. A wave of warmth hit me in the face as I stepped into the store, causing my eyes to water slightly. Attention shoppers, the store will be closing in 10 minutes, so please start making your way to the checkouts. Thank you, and have a good night. A woman's voice echoed over the intercom. I hurriedly grabbed a pre-made sandwich and headed towards the drinks aisle. With my head down, I walked, reading the label of my less-than-exciting dinner, and I decided I would grab another sandwich on my way out. When I looked up, I found myself staring into the aisle I had entered, only to see my ex-girlfriend Natalie standing there with her boyfriend Ari. Her eyes met mine, and I started to tear up again, but not because of the temperature of the air. She broke her gaze and continued talking to Ari, her expression never changing from the smile she had already been wearing before she saw me. I looked away and started making my way to the end of the aisle, walking past them, but not acknowledging them in the slightest. As I brushed past Ari, I realized how much bigger he was than me, at least 3 or 4 inches taller, and probably a good 20 kilograms heavier. For reference, I'm 6'2", and weigh 92 kilograms lean, so I'm not small by any stretch, but this guy dwarfed me. As I grabbed a Red Bull, I wondered to myself why it had hit me that hard. It had been years since I dated her, and years since she drifted out of my life. We were 16 when she confessed her feelings for me, 5 years ago now. We had been good friends before that, and we were still good friends after I broke up with her. But I took her for granted. So when she started becoming a less consistent part of my life, I was too stubborn to tell her that I missed her. I was snapped out of my own internal dialogue suddenly as my phone started vibrating in my pocket, emitting a strange analog beeping sound that I hadn't heard it make before. I looked around to see Natalie and Ari looking confused while also staring at their phones. This is an emergency alert. Get to the nearest enclosed structure immediately. Close and lock all doors and windows, turn off all the lights, and do not make any noise that will be detectable from outside the structure. If you are in your house, close the blinds and fill as many containers with water as you can. If you are in a public structure, such as a store or a recreational facility, then follow as many of those same steps as you can. If you are in a vehicle, shut off the engine and lock the doors. For all who are listening to this alert, do not look into the fog, and under no circumstances should you go outside. This alert will repeat once every 12 hours, and any updates will be shared periodically. You should be prepared to stay indoors for at least a week. This is not a drill. Stand by for updates. All the phones in the store blared in unison. There was a moment of complete silence as the few late-night customers in the store looked over to the closing staff, who were just as dumbfounded as everyone else. Then the store broke out into a hurried panic, as who I assume was the store supervisor made her way to the back of the store to shut off the lights, while the other 2 ladies who were at the checkouts began to lock the doors. I went to call Marcus, my mate who's in the Air Force, to ask what the hell is going on, but there was no signal at all. "Nah, bro!" Ari shouted in anger as he grabbed Natalie by the wrist and started walking her over to the sliding glass door that was in the process of being locked. As the lights all dimmed out row by row, we were all left in pitch-black darkness, excluding the glowing sign of the service station across the street and the barely visible streetlights outside that were being drowned out by the thick fog that everyone had just noticed. Ari turned on his phone's flashlight and kept walking in the darkness until Natalie pulled away from him. "We can't go out there, Ari. There's something wrong with that fog," Natalie yelled at her partner. "Let me out right fucking now!" Ari shouted at the poor lady who just locked the place up. "I can't do that, sir," she replied softly, causing him to start banging on the glass, threatening to break it. "Ari, please, calm down, babe. Can't we just wait until we know what's going on?" Natalie begged as she grabbed Ari's forearm and attempted to stop him from shattering the only thing separating us from the strange mist outside. "Dude, come on. You don't know what's out there," I interrupted. "It could be a chemical attack or something. Just at least wait until we get an update, man." I tried to reason, but it was no use. "Fuck you, pussy. I'm not getting held against my will in a supermarket. Who the hell would chemical attack New Zealand, dumbass?" He responded to my reasoning. This is something I had already been thinking. It wouldn't explain why we had to turn the lights out, and it wouldn't explain why we had to remain quiet. But I was hoping that he wouldn't be able to think all that through. "Let me out," I said. "What the fuck don't you understand?" He shouted at the top of his lungs as he shoved Natalie off his arm and onto the hard epoxy floor, then resumed his banging on the glass, but much harder now. "You gotta let him out," I said to the grocery worker as I helped Natalie to her feet. The rest of the dozen customers who were in the store had crowded behind us, watching the whole thing go down. "He's gonna get us all killed if he breaks that glass," I argued. "Let him out." The worker reluctantly put in the code for the door's automatic opening system to activate, and the glass began to slide to the side. Ari looked back at Natalie in rage, seeing that she was not going to leave with him. The large man then walked out, and the doors shut behind him, immediately being locked by the store lady whose hands were now shaking. We all watched in silence as Ari's silhouette disappeared into the fog until the only thing we could make out was his phone's flashlight gently glowing through the mist. All of a sudden, it seemed like he had stopped moving. The light didn't get any dimmer, or seem to be getting further away at all. As around 17 of us observed from the darkness of the grocery store, a loud shriek was released into the night, and Ari began sprinting back to the door, and his banging resumed. "Let me the fuck back in! There's something out! Out!" He began to shout, but was cut off as his legs were pulled out from under him, and the wind was knocked out of his lungs as he landed hard on his stomach, his nose cracking on the concrete. Natalie went to scream, but I covered her mouth, and we both watched as Ari was dragged back into the fog by a tall, lanky humanoid silhouette, still clutching onto his phone. Eventually, the light from his flashlight was completely engulfed by the wall of fog, and we were all left with our mouths agape and tears in our eyes as the severity of our situation set in. Nobody really said much over the next couple of hours. Everyone was too shaken up, I guess. At around 12:15 a.m., I checked my phone as Natalie lay on top of me, fast asleep, her face buried into my hoodie. She had been crying since, well, we all watched what happened to Ari. After that, everyone found a place to themselves, and Natalie held on to me, soaking my shoulder with her tears, which made their way down to my skin. I hated that I was happy at that moment. I felt so selfish about being content in her sorrow, but I missed her so much. I missed her more than I let myself know, and was just thankful that I had her there with me. I thanked God that I didn't have to go through this nightmare alone. I fell asleep shortly after, closing my eyes and taking in the noises around me. The humming of the fridges, Natalie's soft breathing, gentle sobs from across the store, and I'm sure a couple of times I heard screams in the distance outside the apparent security of this store. I awoke to my phone vibrating again, but it was only my 7:30 a.m. alarm. Natalie must have already been awake because she was holding me tight, and there were fresh tears on my hoodie. I lay there for a bit, hugging her, ignorant to the world that, for all I knew, was ending anyway. I was also ignorant to the fact that the sun hadn't come up, or at least, it wasn't reaching us through the fog, meaning that it must be completely encasing us. How far does the fog stretch? How far would it have to extend into the sky for not even a hint of daylight to shine through? These are questions I did not have because I was holding on to the girl who I had never really stopped loving, making me probably the only person at that moment who was trapped in a dream, not a nightmare. Natalie and I ate breakfast in silence. I guess there are worse places to be trapped than a well-stocked grocery store. However, as 10 a.m. rolled around, a new alert sounded out from everyone's phones. This is an emergency alert. It is still very unsafe outside, so stay where you are. Keep all the lights off, and do not make any noise that will be detectable from outside your structure. Avoid looking into the fog or standing in a position where you are visible from the outside. Cover as many windows as possible, and preferably hide in a room that can be locked off from the rest of your structure if necessary. If something is in your structure or is trying to get inside, then it knows you're there. In this scenario, hide. Do not attempt to confront it under any circumstances. Notable updates. The electrical and water systems will not be operational by this time tomorrow, so if you have not done so, fill up as many containers with water as you can. You will receive another alert every 12 hours. Thank you. Stand by for any updates. I stood up and stretched, feeling the stiffness in my back from sitting on the hard supermarket floor, and my legs had pins and needles. I looked down at Natalie, who seemed lost in thought. I wasn't sure if she had heard the update, but then again, what did it matter? The loss of power would mean that all the refrigerated items would spoil, but there was enough long-lasting food to feed us all for months, probably. Drinks as well. I knew our biggest problem would be warmth, as we would lose the electronic heating system, but before I could think any more on that, a commotion broke out on the other side of the store. A loud crash echoed across the whole building, and as Natalie and I made our way towards the noise, we discovered that one of the other guys who was trapped in here must have been in his late 50s at least, had been using his free time to get absolutely wasted in the alcoholic section of the store, and was now yanking boxes of booze off of the shelves as he drunkenly laughed to himself. Before I could do anything, another man, maybe in his early 30s, tackled him to the ground and pinned him down, all without saying a word. As the older guy lay there, asking what the problem was in slurred, barely comprehensible English, everyone in the store felt their hearts sink as a loud thumping sound was heard from the front door. And then again, and again, until one of the 3 store workers who wandered over to see who was over there let out an almost impossibly loud scream. And that was what sealed our fate. The store erupted into chaos as the glass door was shattered, and an inhuman shriek reverberated in our ears as whatever was outside was no longer outside. I looked to Natalie, who appeared to be frozen in place, teary-eyed as she breathed rapid and shallow breaths. I took her by the hand and ran as fast as I could towards the storage room out back. I knew they had to have one in order to hold on to the stock that they couldn't fit on the shelves yet. But as we reached the door, screams and roars filled the store behind us. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that it was locked. I shook the handle out of desperation and then tried to open the other larger door that the forklifts came in and out of, but I didn't know the code. I embraced Natalie, and I guess I just prepared for it to end until I heard a sst and looked back over to the door to see that the store supervisor was holding it slightly ajar while gesturing for us to quickly come inside. We ran to the entrance and left the main part of the building, where we found the supervisor and the other surviving employee, along with one other customer, who had apparently been in here ever since Ari was killed. The lights were on in the storage room because there were no windows, which took a while to adjust to after being in total darkness for the last 12 hours, but it was a nice change. Over the course of the day, we heard many thumps and bangs. Occasionally, something would get knocked over, and glass would smash. Whatever was out there was looking everywhere for survivors, but we were safe in here. Natalie and I made a bed out of a few 20-kilogram sacks of rice, which was honestly so much nicer than the floor. The other 3 people in there with us tried to ask us about ourselves, our lives, but I did most of the talking. Natalie was still grieving, and the others understood that, though I did see her smile a couple of times, which was nice. The other employee didn't say much. I assumed it was because of what happened to the female staff member after the door shattered, so I didn't really try to push him for conversation. Honestly, I wasn't really in a social mood myself, but it was just nice to have some sense of normalcy after the shit show that has been our lives over the last couple of days. On day 4, I remembered what the alert had said about the power shutting off. It turns out there's a backup generator that should power everything we need for another couple of days, with most of the lights in the store being off, so it really felt like we were home free. At 10 o'clock on the fourth night, I heard the emergency alert sound off from across the room as I lay next to Natalie, since both of our phones had died already. I tried to listen in on what it was saying, but I couldn't quite make it out from where I was. So I got up in the dark and made my way over to the soft glow of the supervisor's phone screen. By the time I could hear what was being said, I only just caught the end of it. Be prepared to stay inside indefinitely. You will receive another alert every 12 hours. Thank you. Stand by for any updates. My heart sank to my stomach hearing this, and as I looked over to the supervisor who shared my expression, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Indefinitely? I mean, it would be easier for us having all of this stock to ourselves. But what about people trapped in their houses, their cars? How are they expected to survive this? As I pondered to myself, I turned around, suddenly startled by the sound of the male employee speaking for the first time since we'd been here. "Fuck this," was all he said as he entered the code for the large door, which made a loud mechanical whirring as it lifted up. I didn't even have time to process what had happened. I didn't have time to be angry at this man for killing us, and I didn't have time to sprint back to Natalie before I heard her being dragged away by one of those creatures, her hands squeaking across the floor as they tried and failed to grip onto it. The creature was pale, humanoid, but not human. If you've ever seen a hairless chimpanzee, it kind of looked like that. Limbs were grotesque and distorted. Too long for its body, and its face was more human. Its skin was a light gray color, pulled tightly over its strangely proportioned body. I noticed how it was shrieking, an ungodly sound, but its face was expressionless, its mouth only slightly open as it screamed. I think that was the weirdest part. I thought all of this as I watched this hideous thing drag the girl I love into the consuming darkness of the grocery store. That's when something grabbed me by the leg and pulled it out from under me, causing me to hit my head on the floor, and everything faded to black. "Truth or dare?" Natalie asked me. Truth," I replied. Natalie thought for a moment before Sarah, my mate Marcus's missus, who was sitting next to her, whispered in her ear, causing a massive grin to form on her face. Okay, she giggled as she adjusted her posture and looked me in the eyes, trying to keep a straight face. "Okay, Roman, if you were stuck on an island with all of us, who would you eat first?" I thought for a moment as I looked around the hot tub at all of my close friends. My eyes landed on Max, who is quite overweight, and I couldn't help but smile, causing everyone to laugh, including Max, who splashed water in my face and retorted, "I'd eat all of you before you got the chance." To which Marcus said, "We believe you, bud," and everyone burst out into laughter again. "Okay, Natalie, that truth or dare?" I asked. "Truth," she replied without hesitation. I pretended to ponder my question for a moment. "Would you," I began, as I stood up in the pool, clutching something in my left hand, "make me the happiest man in the world?" I continued as I got down on one knee before her. "And marry me?" I asked as I held a ring out of the water for her, eliciting a gasp from both of my mates and their partners. Natalie's eyes began to tear up, and she asked, "Are you for real?" Covering her mouth with her shaking hands. I nodded yes, and she screamed out, "Yes! Of course I will," before she jumped on top of me, taking us both underwater as she kissed me. After we all dried off and said our goodbyes, Max came up to me. "Hey man, congratulations! Honestly, I've been waiting for this day since you guys met. Always knew she was the one for you," he said. I looked at him for a moment before replying, "What do you mean, bro? When I first started dating her, you told me that she was no good for me. It's like one of the main reasons I broke up." That's when the words I was saying hit me in the face like a bag of bricks. Max stared at me, his smile not shifting in the slightest. "How long have you and Natalie been together now?" he asked. "Must be around 5 years. About time you popped the question, haha," he chuckled. But with every second that passed, my heart started beating more and more rapidly. "This isn't real," I said before squeezing my eyes shut and waking up. A long tendril slid out of my throat as I fell to the ground below and threw up everywhere. I looked up to see a giant, glowing figure with a dozen other tendrils protruding from its shoulders. The skinny figure stood still, its frame reaching the height of the streetlight next to it. As I tried to make sense of what I was looking at, my eyes made their way down its inhuman body. At the end of each glowing blue tendril was a person, the tendrils entering through each of their mouths, seemingly absorbing something from their bodies as pulsating rings of light emanated from the person and up the tendril. I almost threw up for a second time until I saw Natalie among the dozen bodies attached to the creature. Without hesitation, I reached up to touch her hand, and as I did, I lost consciousness again. "Unzip the tent, babe. Let some light in," I said as I wiped the sleep from my eyes and cracked my stiff back, cursing myself for forgetting an air mattress on a trip we'd been planning for months. I watched and admired my beautiful fiancée as she got up half naked and unzipped our tent. "I hope you slept better than I did," I muttered as I lay back down in my sleeping bag. "Babe, you should have had the air mattress. I would have been happy to trade places," Natalie replied as she opened up her pack and started rummaging through it. "Nah, I'm fine, honestly. I'm not letting my fiancé sleep on the ground," I retorted, my arm covering my eyes, immediately regretting that I got Natalie to let the sun in. "You're such a man," she scoffed jokingly as she tossed me one of the pre-made sandwiches from her pack. I paused for a moment, a split second of deja vu overtaking my body as I read the label. All of a sudden, I sat up straight in my sleeping bag. "Natalie, this isn't real. None of this is real," I said to her in a panic, causing her to stare at me, concerned. "Are you feeling okay, Roman?" she asked. "Did you get any sleep at all?" "Natalie, the grocery store, the fog, the emergency alert. Don't you remember? None of this is real. We aren't together. We aren't engaged." I spoke quickly, my voice trembling as I tried to get her to snap out of this false reality. I watched as Natalie's face went white and her eyes filled with tears. "What's going on? What is this?" She started to speak, but was interrupted by a familiar shriek in the distance. I looked out of the tent to see at least 1,000 of those chimp creatures making their way towards us, seemingly sensing that we weren't being fooled by this illusion any longer. "Natalie, you have to wake up!" I yelled, the creatures getting closer. "Close your eyes and wake." I regained consciousness and caught Natalie as the tendrils slid out of her throat, letting her fall. She threw up onto the ground as I held her, before staring back up at the massive, glowing creature. That's when we looked around. In the distance, there were more glowing creatures, hundreds of them spread out over the town. "We can see through the fog," Natalie stated, which I honestly hadn't even noticed until then. That's when we heard frantic screaming and looked to our left. One of those chimp creatures was dragging a man out of his car and over to the glowing figure. We watched as one of the tendrils violently shoved its way down the man's throat, and his screaming stopped. Then, the other creature just walked off, paying us absolutely no mind. Natalie then looked back up at the bodies attached to the tendrils and gasped as she saw Ari. She went to reach for him, but I grabbed her hand. "Natalie, if you touch him, you'll go back in, and there's no guarantee that you'll ever come back out. It's like it completely wipes your memory every time," I told her. "How do you know?" she asked. "Maybe I'll remember the second time." "You won't, Natalie. I went back in for you, and I'm lucky that I remembered it all," I responded. She stared at me for a moment. "Why did you go back in for me if it's such a big risk?" she questioned. I paused, my eyes welled up. "Because I love you, Nat." An explosion then went off in the distance. I saw it over Natalie's shoulder, then another, each one making its way closer, seemingly each being aimed at those glowing blue creatures. "Run!" I yelled as I grabbed Natalie's hand and sprinted away from Ari and the mass of glowing tentacles. Another explosion went off behind us as a plane roared overhead. The explosion also ignited the service station right next to us, which let off a shockwave that sent us flying off the street. Everything went silent, and I could feel my consciousness once again slipping away. The last thing I saw was Natalie silently screaming in my face, worry overtaking her expression as she held tightly onto my hands. That's when I noticed a piece of fence sticking out of my abdomen. "Shit!" I thought to myself. As everything faded to black, I saw a group of military-looking men running towards Natalie and me, then nothing. I woke up to the voices of Natalie and Marcus talking to each other. I sat up in the apparent hospital bed I was in and immediately regretted it, holding onto my stomach in pain. "Whoa, lay back down, bud. Just relax," Marcus said as he stood up from his chair and slowly laid me back down. Natalie stood up as well, tightly gripping my hand and kissing me on the forehead. "What is this? Is the fog? Is it over?" I asked, confused about how we were here right now in a hospital. "No, it's not over. My higher-ups have decided that we have to start over. Most of the remaining world leaders have come to the same consensus." Marcus paused briefly. "You two were lucky to have survived. Most people didn't. Those things." "Those people are still alive, Marcus," I exclaimed. "You can't just bomb the world when those people are still down there. They're in a trance, living in an illusion that those blue things are creating. I can't explain it, but I saw it. Natalie did too. I only got us out because I felt an unbelievable sense of déjà vu and realized it wasn't real." Marcus looked at me, his expression grave. "I know, Roman. We're trying to figure out a way to deal with them without causing more harm. But right now, the priority is to keep everyone who's still here safe. You and Natalie are the only ones who've had any interaction with those things and came back, and we need your help to understand what happened down there." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. "I'll do whatever I can to help, but we can't forget about them. They're still people, trapped in a nightmare." Over the next few months, I recounted this story to more officials in suits than I can count. I told them how I had done twice what nobody else had done once. I went into the dream, as they call it, and I came back both times. Though I did manage to convince them not to bomb the world and kill everyone, it has come at a price. Natalie sobbed as I told her the plan. She cried into my shoulder, just as she did that night many months ago in the grocery store during the emergency alert. I felt her tears soak down to my skin as I told her that I had to go back into the dream and try to wake everyone up. The chance that I would not wake back up was sitting at the forefront of my mind. But I had to be strong for Nat. I just hope that if I do get trapped in a dream, that I'll get to go through with that wedding, I said to her softly, trying to put on a smile. "If you don't come back, I'm coming in after you," she replied, tears in her eyes. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to be selfless, but I knew that I would have no complaints if she and I were trapped together again. That selfish part of my brain was still active. On the 14th of November, 2023, an emergency alert was sent to every mobile device across the globe. It warned of a thick fog that would swallow any who were caught in its midst, and the whole world locked themselves inside. You may be wondering why I'm telling you this story. You may be thinking to yourself, I don't remember the day the fog rolled in and the emergency alert sounded. That is why I'm telling you this story. This is not real.